Hi, I'm Catherine Webster, and this is my series, Angels in the Darkness, about my girls, my precious angels that are in LA, California, right now, still suffering from the abuse, the neglect of the systems that are supposed to be in place for my granddaughter and my daughter, and my daughter's partner, who has diabetes and is an amputee, and the unrelenting disability prejudice that is so rampant there. And in my last talk, I discussed how my grandbaby's disability was stolen illegally by the state, and how we're still trying at this point to get that back for her, because it's fundamentally so important so that they can afford housing. And right now they're still not in stable housing, but my daughter does everything humanly possible to make sure Michelle has a roof over her head. And the stress is just gut-wrenching. So this is my effort to bring attention to this ongoing problem that was man-made in California and is done deliberately to take an entire segment of people and destabilize them and put them in this harm's way. And I also discussed in my last show that what happened at the disability office and how badly my girls were treated. And I touched on the agencies, all of the agencies that we had been to that were very unsafe, very unpredictable, and violent at times, to the point where the hospital had put my grandbaby's life in jeopardy multiple times, right exactly after her hospital stays on 2 occasions. And I touched on the fact that during that time period, the only place that I felt really safe was on the streets. And it seems to be so counterintuitive, but that city is such a city of contrast, of extremes, that having been there for quite a long time and living it, you realize the safest places are not the places you think are going to be safe. The stereotypical thing you're told is that the streets will get you murdered, mugged, killed. Actually, the unsafest place was LA Children's Hospital. So I'm going to start this discussion with the time period revolving around my son-in-law's death. 13 and a half years ago, in March of that year, my grandbaby was hospitalized at the LA Children's Hospital. And the doctors came in after many days of her being in an emergency situation and told my daughter and son-in-law that her stomach was in the wrong position and they would have to operate. And that day, my son-in-law became extremely ill. And it was kind of passed off as stress because, of course, they were under enormous stress. And he started getting chest pains. And through the day, he asked for assistance. He didn't want to leave my granddaughter and my daughter, obviously. So he asked for some pain relief from the hospital. And they said, well, what we'll do is we'll take you downstairs and give you an x-ray. They took him downstairs and gave him an x-ray, which they actually fundamentally were not supposed to do in a children's hospital, which they did. Then they said, go back upstairs, and ultimately, when the pain continued, they gave him morphine, which, again, they were not supposed to do. And so at that point, he got lulled into a false sense of security. And as through the night, he started vomiting. And in the early morning hours, my son-in-law died of a cardiac arrest in front of my daughter and granddaughter. And they hit the code blue. They came in, they did the paddles, tried to bring him back, and then called it. And one of the most horrendous things about this, with so many horrendous things about it, Kaiser Permanente is attached to the LA Children's Hospital with a bridge. If they had taken his pain seriously and not dismissed it as stress or given him morphine and taken him across to the Heart Foundation, he may have lived. Just before he passed away, he started vomiting. And one of the male nurses came in and said, "You've got a chest cold. You're going to make Michelle sick. You better go home." At that point, he was to the point where he was going to arrest. And he did. And so some things came to light after the death. But at that moment in time, my grandbaby was still in very serious condition. My daughter called me from my grandbaby's bed and said, "Mom, I have something to tell you. Oscar died." And I was in shock. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I said, what do you mean, honey? Oscar died? He had a cardiac arrest in front of Michelle and I this morning, and he died in front of us, Mom. And so my daughter was in deep shock, obviously. And we talked on the phone for a long time. And at that point, one of the nurses came in and actually said to my daughter, "I think we could have done more." And my daughter said, "Where's my husband now?" And she said that he's in the morgue downstairs. And my daughter said, "I'd like to go down and see my husband in the morgue." And she said, "You can't." They refused my daughter to go down and see her husband in the morgue. And I was on the phone at the time, and I said, "Hand me over to these people so I can get this sorted." And Katie said, "Not just yet, Mom, not just yet. Let me focus on Michelle and get her through this, and then I'll be able to see him." I was on the phone constantly with her, and I had already made plans to come out because Michelle was in the hospital. But, of course, now I was already planning to do it, so now, of course, the plans are still going forward, obviously. I said, "I'll be out as soon as I can, honey. As soon as the plane can get there, I will be out." My daughter never left Michelle's side for the days that remained for her to be there. I think it was 5 days in all that Michelle continued to be in this situation. And they realized her stomach wasn't in the wrong place, thank God. Why they would tell my daughter and son-in-law that, I don't know. But it's the LA Children's Hospital, so. And during that 5-day period, Katie stayed with Michelle. She never took her eyes off Michelle. My daughter is the most beautiful, vigilant mother I've ever seen in my life. And even in spite of her husband, her soulmate, dying in front of her, Katie never wavered once, and stayed beside Michelle's side and took care of her. So basically the nurses they did very little because Katie was right there monitoring and making sure Michelle was okay, which she always does in every hospital visit. All through the years, Katie never leaves Michelle's side. And Every day, Katie would ask, "Can I see my husband?" And they'd deny her. And she'd say, "Mom, they denied me again. They won't let me see him." On the 5th day, they said, "Yes, you can see him." And when Katie was getting ready to go downstairs, they said, "Oh, the coroner came and got him. He's gone." It's hard to imagine the cruelty of those people. The way that the psychological, emotional damage that they do to a human being is almost unbelievable. It's unconscionable. So he was at the coroner's, and they discovered that he had, his arteries were clogged, and that certain medicines might have helped, but he had no symptoms. He was asymptomatic, so he didn't get the help he needed. And he never drank, he didn't smoke, he was exercised, appeared to be healthy, there was no symptoms. So it was assumed the stress had done it. And that, of course, is when more of their demonic ways took form. My daughter asked for the x-ray and the paperwork. I got there right before the funeral, right after Michelle got out of the hospital. And I arrived, and my daughter had asked for the paperwork from the x-ray. What they had given us was not Oscar's x-ray at all, but a little Indian boy's with a name from India, boy's x-ray, a child's x-ray. And then the paperwork stated that during the night he had left in a car and come back. So they had assumed he was going to get help in another hospital. They didn't have a car, and at no point did he leave Michelle's side. So the lying began immediately, as it always does with them. And, you know, you think this is a suable offense. This cannot stand. This cannot happen. These people gave him morphine and dumbed his pain down to the point where he couldn't adequately know how severely ill he was, so that he could seek help somewhere else. They made him believe that it would pass and put him in such a stupor that the time period that he could have gotten help was gone. And when he started throwing up, of course, it was too late. He was told, "Go home at that point, you have a cold." Everything that could go wrong went wrong. And he passed away. And then their lying began. And we had the funeral. So many people loved him and came to the funeral. It was a beautiful funeral, very, very intensely emotional because he was 46 years old. And so many friends and family came. And then I stayed past the funeral and tried to help my girls as best I could. They had a wonderful marriage. They were happy together. And they were beautiful parents to Michelle. And he died too soon, and he died because the hospital, instead of saying, "You're having heart attack symptoms, we need to put you in an ambulance and get you somewhere else," try to get some medicine to you, just hid the fact we're not sure if he ever had the x-ray because they gave us someone else's x-ray and gave him medication that would dumb him down to the point where he wouldn't seek help himself. And then they claimed he had left the hospital and come back, which he never did, which they didn't have a car. So he couldn't have driven away in a car. All the lies that come with that place. Over the years, because my daughter was alone, a single mother, and couldn't afford to move out of that neighborhood, Cedars-Sinai and other hospitals are an hour away. And my granddaughter has severe disabilities that need to be dealt with immediately, and that's the closest place. So within 2 weeks of the funeral, maybe less, my granddaughter came down sick again. And we went back there. We went back there to the emergency room. And they said, oh, all right, you're back. How are you? And my daughter said, my husband just died. I'm horrible. And she said, still? And I said, yes, still. It's only been like 14 days. I mean, what is wrong with you people? What is wrong with you? The cruelty. The next cruel thing they did was take us upstairs and walk us past the room my son-in-law had just died in, 2 doors down, to put my granddaughter in a room 2 doors down from that door, and walked my girls right straight past the door where they had just lost their husband and father. On the same floor, 2 doors down from the room. I was extremely upset and rebelled. I said, you have to be insane to do this. This is so cruel. At that point, Katie said, it's the only room up here. Michelle needs the help. Mom, I have to bear it for Michelle, and we're going to take the room. We have to have the room for her. And so, you know, I understand, obviously, better than anybody why you're doing this, Mother, but we have to have the room for Michelle. We can't. We have to be here, and we have to have the room because Michelle wasn't feeling well. I said, okay. In order to stand it, Katie put a little tribute up on the door saying, please, for my husband's sake, because he recently died, can you sign it? Everybody sign it. She put hearts on it, made a beautiful little tribute, and put it on the door. I said, could everybody sign this as a tribute to my husband? Within an hour, somebody had ripped it down off the door. And when I went out to ask, where's the tribute, they said, we don't want it up. It's upsetting other people. It's upsetting a lot of people. And I said, listen, I'll tell you who's upset is my daughter and my granddaughter, because it was their husband and father. They're upset. They're 2 doors away from where he died 2 weeks ago. They're the ones that are upset. I really don't give a damn if the nurses are upset or the doctors are upset or anybody else is upset. Put that back up. And then I called administration. It was put back up, much to their chagrin. They were so mad because this happened in their precious hospital, and that was, they almost treated it like he had somehow tainted their beautiful, wonderful reputation. This had happened in their beautiful, wonderful hospital, and now forever, this was a stain on them, which is true. That part is true. It is on them. This whole thing is on them. And a lot of them carried that over through the years toward my daughter. Right now where they are, where I'm praying to God that they can stay. They're in unstable housing, but they're in housing, and it's near Cedars-Sinai. So if my grandbaby, heaven forbid, but she has these very fragile times, has to go, she can go there. I mean, that is why I am trying so hard to get the help so that they can stay in the neighborhood they're in, so we can be done with that horrible hospital, that demonic place that's been so horrible to my family and myself, because obviously I've been banned from LA Children's Hospital in spite of the fact that we went in there for that physical, as I described in another show. Had to, didn't have a choice in that. Had to go in and get the physical done. Michelle went through with flying colors. And I went in, there was no issues that day, no issues. No one attacked us or played up that day. And then I get the phone call after I get back to Vermont that I'm no longer allowed on the premises. At which point my daughter said they want to strip us of any help or any kind of support. They want us all alone there, so there's no one to even witness what they do to us. So right now, they're near Cedars-Sinai, which is a little comfort if they can only stay nearby and not have to go back near that other place. My daughter, I want to go into some things about my daughter and discuss some of what happened before she left, why she went out, what we experienced, because that place is such a contrast of extremes. When it's good, it's really good, and when it's bad, it is so demonically bad. My daughter, fantastic child, exemplary teenager, never had any issues. Grew up to be a beautiful girl. She's 6'2", looks like a model. She's so gorgeous, inside now. And worked for a time with the governor's office here in Montpelier, the governor that was in office. She left over 17 years ago, so was the person in office then. Worked with the lieutenant governor, given Volunteer of the Year award, went to the Emerald Ballroom, went to the governor's balls. Very, very conscientious about people's rights, and but wasn't able to attain success here like she wanted. Is limited as to what you can do here. There's limitations. It's beautiful, we have beautiful, beautiful mountains and everything, but there's limitations as far as career-wise. So, and also my daughter despised the cold. It made her not feel well, and she decided then to move to California. That was over 17 years ago. And she went out by herself. This is a courageous girl. My daughter, she is so brave and so courageous. It really, it's astounding. Sometimes I think, my God, she's like our ancient ancestors that came across the ocean and the Mayflower. She just is so courageous and so confident, so capable. And she's needed that over the years. And when she got out there, like so many, she decided to go to acting school for a little while. I went out right behind her to see where she was and see if she was okay. Flew out right behind her. And I confess, I did try to bring her back home. I said, Katie, is there any way that you'll come back home? I don't know if I can do this. This is just going to be too much for me. I can't have you that far away. And she said, Ma, I love it here. Feel that sunshine. Feel how nice it is. And she said, I'm going to try to have my life here. And she went to an acting school for a little while, met people from Young and the Restless, Lost, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Things were, in Hollywood, it has this energy. There's two energies, and I noticed it the second I got out there. There's the top energy that flows like an adult playground. There's fascinating things to see. There's wonderful things to do. So many different things you'd never see here. Very astoundingly different things. That is very enchanting. Then there's also the energy underneath it, which is very dark, always flowing, very demonic. There's a dread. There's a darkness there. I felt it the first time I went out. It's never changed. But back then, the state was run by different people. And the homelessness issue wasn't, it was there, but it wasn't like now. This is a result of a concentrated, deliberate effort by people that have been in office for these last few years. From the top down, every agency is contaminated and corrupt. Everyone that I've been in my experience, everyone that I dealt with, that my girls dealt with, it's designed to destabilize you and make you a certain part of the public that is homeless. And there's no umbrella for disabled people, no help. And so she took me to different places, and we, my first visit, we went to Santa Monica Pier. You know, I saw some really wonderful things. Now, my personality is that I'm not easily starstruck or impressed, but I could see why she would say, this is so different. It's a new beginning. It's a happy time. It's gonna be good. It's gonna be good, and I don't have the winters to deal with. And then she met her future husband. It was love at first sight. A few happy years, and then my grandbaby was born. She was sick from birth. I was on my way out to be there for the birth. She came a little tiny bit early. I went out after the birth. She was in the ICU, and she didn't feel well. But they brought her home. We were reunited. They were happy. She was feeling a little better. This was before her disabilities were found, and my daughter and son-in-law had to fight to get those found. I also want to state that out there, the government, they have an unnatural interest in children. They especially interfere with parenting. And parents out there right now will testify to this. There's an unnatural, demonic feeling that somehow parents aren't the final authority, parents aren't the final law when it comes to their own children. It's a very different place than here, where you don't feel that. I never felt that. I've never known anyone that felt that here. Out there, there's almost a strange insinuation into a person's life and their children's lives, and they've capitalized on that, and they've made it even more prominent in their latest bill that the school system just implemented. That didn't surprise me when I heard it, but it's horrifying and it's terrifying, and every parent in California that loves their child should be afraid right now, because that place is just so horrible. At this point, when I was out there, you didn't see it like it was, because that was many years ago. And it hadn't gotten to the point where it's at now. You had different people running the government that actually were trying to clean up emissions and things like that. So it wasn't as foggy, as smoggy. It wasn't, there were things to do, things to see, and it seemed like it had been a good choice for Katie. It seemed like a good choice, like things were going to work out. The day my son-in-law and daughter got married for their honeymoon, they went to the last taping of Jay Leno and walked up to stage, and on stage, my daughter shook Jay Leno's hand. And she called me and said, "Mom, I said, I saw it, you taped it, and I said, I saw it. You walked up in your beautiful purple dress and shook it. I said, well, honey, you know, I'm happy for you that you're happy. Of course, it tore my heart out to be so far away from my girls, and it always has been beyond painful. And mothers who have children that live far away and grandchildren, they know what I'm saying. But you want them to be happy, and she seemed to be happy, and things were going well, and she had a great marriage, things were well. And then Oscar died. And the moment Katie was alone, and I stayed out there the whole summer to be with them. I hated to come back, but I had to come back. The minute she was alone, the agencies started attacking. But this last 2 years is where it's really gotten to just nonstop crisis point, and where it's become so obvious that the disability prejudice is it's medieval. It's like there's no disability laws on the books in California. That's what it feels like you're stepping back in time to ancient times where there were no bills or laws passed for disabilities at all. The only people that have stepped forward to help my girls are nonprofits, and these people don't make any paycheck. The people that make the huge paychecks are the ones that turn their back entirely. And I've gone over many of those agencies and many of those situations where there was just no help. And then the victim blaming starts, because when you call them on the fact they're not helping, then it's, well, this person didn't do enough, or Katie's not doing enough. And I said, she's doing everything. She does it all. Everything. What more can she do? She's doing it all. You're doing nothing. So the victim blaming is very much a part of the system. And that is why they have this idea that they've put in to people's mind, the public's mind, that the streets, and I'm not saying no one gets hurt on the streets. I'm not saying that, but with my experience, and it's only my experience, it may not be anybody else's, but with my experience, when I came out of those agencies is the only time I felt relaxed, because all you saw in there were the three-piece suits and the demonic presence. That's what you saw. And I met with many people in Wilshire with suits on and the fancy three-piece dress, all of that. And they laughed in my face, smiled in my face, and lied in my face, and did nothing for my girls, and victim blamed. So when I got out on the streets, I felt at ease. I felt almost unnaturally comfortable. Like, oh, I'm back on the streets. Now I'm away from that. And the energy on the street with all the homeless people was such that I started making friends. Friends that changed my life on some levels. And the stereotypical feeling is, especially for the homeless, that somehow when someone looks at them, the first default thought is they brought it on themselves. I wouldn't ask anybody to do what I did. It was an organic thing I did, me being me. It happened that way, I guess because of a series of my personality, my intuition, my energy. I wouldn't advocate for anybody to walk up to anybody they don't know, whether it's on the street, in a store, a bank. I wouldn't advocate for anybody to do that. But my own personal response to these people was in such a way that it invited conversation, and I got to know people that became important to me. And I'll talk about one of those people and why I would hope that I want to help my girls more than anything in this life. I want them to be in stable housing and feel better. I couldn't believe that the state they were in, wanted to make my little disabled granddaughter a homeless child, but they do. That's what they want. And the perception of the homeless is that they don't work, they don't try. That is not true. There are many people that work and are homeless. They try everything. My daughter works from home. She doesn't ask, these agencies don't help. She's got everything on her shoulders. And it's not true that everyone on the street, 9 out of 10 people didn't bring it on themselves. This is a manufactured, man-made problem that was designed to do this to them. I know this to be true. Some people, of course, in any population, do certain things and they end up with consequences. But I would ask people, especially now, with things so bad, so many people in this situation, and holidays coming up. I'm not saying if you see someone on the street, give them money. If you don't have it, don't do it, because money's a scarce commodity for everyone right now, or most people. But if you look at them and try to say to yourself, but for the grace of God, go I. And just not go to the default feeling of they brought this on themselves. It's easy when the government or whoever, the society wants you to think that, because then that puts a gap between you and them. You're making a judgment about your fellow American that could be so wrong because you don't know what they've been through. And if I wasn't saying this to cameras, no one would know what my girls and son-in-law went through, because my daughter doesn't confide in anybody. She carries it all on her own shoulders. And I got to the point where I said, I can't stand this. I've tried every agency. I've called thousands of people. Everyone turns their back. There's a whole world out there, a whole world, and there's people in the world. There are people in the world that are caring and generous and kind. The right ears will hear. The right eyes will see. The right light will be put on this. I really believe that. I have to believe that. And one of the ways the society keeps this gap going is to say these people don't work, they don't care, they're drug addicted, they're insane. But those same people could find themselves in that same situation and not very far from it with enough financial difficulty or a demonic landlord, and then they wouldn't want anyone thinking that about them. So I'm not saying everyone it doesn't have some consequence of their actions, but I'm saying this society is set up to do this to people that have not been, through any fault of their own, homeless, who are living in cars, vans, tents, motels. You don't always have to do what I did. I wouldn't advocate for people to do what I did. It happened to happen organically, me being me. But I'll give you an example of some of the extremes. I was in McDonald's having my daily cup of tea. I was getting ready to go to the store, get the girls some supplies. And because I love animals so dearly, a little puppy dog ran up to me. And of course, this is how I met a lot of people, through their dogs, because dogs and I, we have that beautiful rapport, and dogs know I love them, so they immediately seek me out. So Princess came running up to me, a little hound. I wouldn't say little, kind of mid-sized, chubby, well taken care of, beautiful little hound dog girl. And I started baby talking to her, and I said, "Hi, sweetheart, how are you?" and everything. She's jumping on me, loving up. And her owner is a man about 6'2", and he says with a Russian accent, "That's my princess. That's my girl. I love my girl more than anything." I said, "Oh, yeah." Well, I went to sit down, and Princess jumped in my lap. And that began a friendship with Tulif. Now, Tulif had grown up in the Soviet Union. he would always say, we weren't allowed anything American. We weren't supposed to hear music, anything. But my mother loved American rock and roll, and she would take our old console and she would put rock and roll on it. And I came to love everything American, everything. Blue Jeans, everything that America is famous for. I love it. I love the music. I love everything. And she would let us hear it, even though it was sanctioned and she wasn't supposed to. And he came over here as a young man, and he went to Texas first, and then he went to California, and then he wasn't here very long when a man was selling puppies for $5, and she was the last one, and he bought his little puppy dog with the last money he had to eat on. And she became his beautiful little companion, his friend. He adores his dog. And we talk about how long my family had been here and how different it is here from California. And don't think all Americans are represented in California. That's not true. There's a whole huge amount of segment of different types of people in America, that California is not a representation of all of America in any way. He didn't know that. He thought it was. And so we'd talk about the Vermont winters and different things and my family lineage and his. And we just had this beautiful friendship. And once in a while during the week when I'd get a chance, I would go over and get a tea, and he'd be there, and we'd visit. And one night, we had visited, and he said, well, we have to go back to the park to find a place to sleep, because he'd been homeless for 5 years. And he, of course, had his citizenship as far as to stay legal. He was legal. But he also felt very vulnerable because he didn't have a home for his puppy dog. And that was, more than anything, that was what hurt him, was not being able to have a roof over her head. And he said, we haven't had much to eat today. Do you want to go get something to eat? And I said, yeah. I didn't have a lot of money on me either. And he had a few dollars on him. I had a few dollars on me. And we walked from the McDonald's to Vaughn's, which is quite a few blocks away. But we went really slow because of my legs and everything, and because I'm older, and because the puppy dog was older. And most of the time we rode the bus, and everything was about her comfort and my comfort with him. Everything was, are you okay? Is she okay? Yes. Let's ride the bus most of the way. Okay. We got there, and he said, I'm going to buy you this day-old bread. And I said, I'm going to buy some of the chicken legs, because the woman there knew him and said, I will give you 6 chicken legs for $5 instead of 5. And they were nice, big, hefty chicken legs. And we went out into the parking lot, and he shared his day-old rolls, and we fed Princess and gave her some. He would take the chicken off with his teeth and make sure there was no bones. I love that about someone when they take care of their animals. They're going straight to heaven in my heart. I mean, they are the gentleness, the kindness. I don't care what a person has manifested for success. I don't care if you've got a mansion on the hill. It's how you treat animals, and that shows me the kind of person you are. So he was a good man, a good person who loved his dog dearly. And so I gave him some chicken. He gave me some rolls. We had a little picnic out in the driveway. Everybody watching us, like, what are these people doing, these homeless people? Oh, there they are, the homeless people. And the moon was coming up. It was a full moon that night. And I said, there's a piece of chicken left. I'm going to give it to you to give to her later. And he said, yes, I'll give it to my girl later. When she wakes up in the middle of the night and we don't have anything, I'll give her the piece of chicken later. And we said our goodbyes. I kissed the puppy dog on the forehead. I said, I'll see you again soon, my darling. And we said our goodbyes. I said, take care of yourselves. I said, do you have anything on the ground to sleep on? He said, I have a blanket, but I put it on her. And I said, we'll work on getting you something else. Next time I see you, we'll work on something. He had actually gone to a couple of agencies with me early in the morning to help my girls. So he was homeless, but he was actually trying to help me, help my girls, help my family. There was that camaraderie from people that were on opposite sides of the planets the day they were born, but that human connection was so real. And this is what people sometimes don't understand. You know, you don't know who you're talking to sometimes. You don't know. Maybe it's an angel. You don't know who you're talking to on the streets. Maybe it's an angelic force. So the moon was full, and I started walking down the street, looking up at the moon, and it was a beautiful night, because it's going to be a beautiful night most of the time in LA. I mean, that's the one thing that it has going for it, is that god-darn weather that is so tempting and so enchanting to everybody, especially if you're from a colder climate. And I'm walking past that horrible LA Children's Hospital, and I'm looking at all the horrors that happened in there, because all the horrors that I discussed before had happened in there before this meeting with To Leave. And I looked up at the moon and I said, it reminded me of the book by Dickens, The Tale of Two Cities. And the beautiful lines in the first paragraph. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. Because I'm thinking, if they could just clean this place up of corruption, if they could take care of the people and stop this demonic activity, this could be a beautiful place again. There's a beauty that's been destroyed and snuffed out by this demonic energy. And I could see, I could feel what enticed my daughter in the first place to this place. There are some beautiful, remarkable things about it, but it's under layers of this corruption and under layers of this hostility and this demonic feeling. And I thought, what a beautiful night. It's so beautiful. In spite of everything bad that was happening, I was with my girls. I was boots on the ground helping my girls, my family. And it was beautiful that night. It was a beautiful moment, in spite of all the horror that was going on. There was humanity. There was compassion. There was friendship. I was with my girls. I was making a difference. And how something can be that horrible and that beautiful at once is something I've tried to figure out. But there's beauty in moments. If you can capture them in that moment, if you can stay in that moment, there's beauty in it. And I was with my family, making a difference. And that night I felt, what a beautiful night. I'm headed toward my girls. I'm going back to the motel. I'm going to be able to hug my family. That man loved his puppy. He would never hurt her for the world. And that's one of the examples of the friendships I made out there in spite of the fact that this demonic energy has been allowed to reign, there are sparks of angels in that city. And most of the time, they're in a place you'd never think to look. And the person that's homeless, that's sitting right next to you, because at the end of the day, we all come into this world with nothing. We all leave with nothing material. It's what we take with us in our heart. That night, I was headed home to my girls that I love so dearly. And when I got back, they were so happy in that moment. Grammy was back, Mom was back. It meant the world. And there's other instances on the street and in other places where the contrast is so stark. It's like there's always two worlds going on at the same time out there. Almost like two realities clashing all the time out there. The experiences I had out there changed me on some levels. Because living here, the homeless here, they kind of stay to themselves. They're already vulnerable. You'll find them by a river or in some woods. You don't go in because that will be threatening to them. And naturally, as human beings, they're going to be defensive of that. What do you want? You're not one of us. You don't understand. But out there, where there's so many on the street, the mattresses on the street, people sleeping on the mattresses on the street. You're walking around the tents. You're walking around the mattresses. And so I hadn't been exposed. First of all, I never believed my family would be in this position. But a demonic landlord put them in this position. My daughter didn't owe a dime of rent. But the court allowed this anyway. I had never seen this volume of people in this amount of hardship and trouble, because coming from here, you're not going to see that. When I got out there, something came over me of, they're right here, and they're human beings, and they're my fellow human beings and Americans. And what I do now reveals more about me than it ever does them. I treated them with kindness, and they treated me with kindness and compassion back in a way that is stunning, because, and I have other episodes that I'll talk about in another time, of people that reached out to me when they had nothing to give me something they didn't even have to give, but because of the bridge that was between us, because of the energy between us, that's what they did. And I saw so much horror and cruelty out there, and yet the opposite extreme of kindness and compassion and camaraderie. I wish I had more time today to talk about one particular incident that is also people that became friends, but there'll be another time. I want to say that going into the Christmas season, I would ask that if you see a homeless person, obviously do what you feel you should do. But the only thing I would ask, because no one really has any money to give away or anything, I mean, people are always strapped. If you could just think to yourself, as you see them, if you could just do like a little paradigm shift in your mind and say, that's someone's son, that's someone's daughter, and maybe they didn't do anything to put themselves in this position. Maybe society is set up to do this to them. And just think a little more compassionately about, you don't have to approach them, give them money, do anything. But just kind of think to yourself, maybe, but for the grace of God, go I. Because society wants you to be on board with displacing these people and hating these people and condemning these people and judging these people. And if you cannot do that, if you can decide with your own mind not to do that, to say, I know what this is expected of me, because everything in this society is looked at, in this world is looked at through money and materialism. But if you could break from that a little bit the next time you see someone and say, but for the grace of God, you don't have to do anything outwardly or manifest anything for them physically, but to, in your own mind, say, I'm just glad my own family, if you could think my own family's safe tonight, I wish that for that person. That would be a beginning to turn some things around in this society where there's actually groups of people that are being put in this position on purpose by society. And the government in California, which does this every day, there's 100,000 homeless in California. That's not in California, in LA County. In LA County alone. And I heard that from someone that works with homeless all the time from one of these nonprofits. 100,000 in LA County, that's one county. If you put all of them in one place, what would that look like? What would that look like? 100,000, every race, fellow Americans, children, disabled people in wheelchairs. What would that look like if you put them all together at once? It would be mind-numbingly terrifying, and that is what's happening. And now they're doing everything they can to put my girls in that position. And that's why I do this, to make sure the word is out, that this is not going to stand, that this has got to be changed, and I do everything I can every day to make my girls' lives better. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.